Welcome back to another episode of Projecting Grandeur. I am your host, Ron Dichter. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being part of our growing community. Today, you are all in for a treat. So, if you're up early and you're catching it when it releases at 5 a.m. or you're catching it later in the day, you're going to want to tune in. We have a special guest, Anthony Dyer, with us today. He is a former U.S. Air Force Combat Special Missions Aviator. That is a lot of things you got going on there, Anthony. He is also the author of Moonchild. His story really takes us from small town roots to high stake missions, through trauma, through healing, rediscovery. We're going to cover it all. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ron. It's a pleasure to be here.
You bet. All right, well, let's just jump right into it. Let's start out with your roots. How did growing up in North Carolina really shape your sense of mission and maybe even identity?
Yeah. So what was unique about growing up in especially small town in Appalachia there, North Carolina is, everybody knew everybody. Everybody knew everybody's business. So there's good sides to that and bad sometimes, you know how that goes. But it really taught me a lot about, about loyalty and friendship, and just, being there for each other's friends back home. I call them my four quarters, and the whole idea of, keeping your circle small, right? And basically, I knew that four quarters was more than 100 pennies, really. So those people I'm keeping up with and that sort of moral compass, they, my family and friends beat into me. That was always kept me rooted, kept me grounded through my, not just 21 years of Air Force, but still to the day.
Yeah, I like that analogy a lot. I've not heard that before, but that really resonates with me. Well, I'm curious, what first called you to get involved in aviation and Air Force's special operations community in the first place?
Yeah. So there was a point in my career where I'd been in like 10 years and I'd had a couple different jobs before then. And, I'm actually, ironically enough, home on leave and I'm at a pizza joint and I'm with some friends and I look out, and I look at the road and, I see the same cracks in roads, what I call it. The same cracks have been there probably my whole life, it's still there to this day. And I realized with the, global war and terror at that point, I'd really been sitting on the sideline and, didn't really test my metal or get out there that much. And then, I was like, man, I don't want to leave cracks. Like there's so much more to this, I want to leave craters. And, I understood at a really young age that when you pass, you can't take anything with you, like the saying is, there's no U-Haul behind a hearse. Right. So basically that means like what you do in life, like Marcus Aurelius says, echoes in eternity. And I want to leave an impression, a footprint. I want to leave behind how I'm remembered. That's very, legacy was always important to me. And, the one way to do that I found out was to join the Air Force, Special Operations Command and fly in the mighty AC-130 gunship in the 16th Special Operations Squadron. And leaving craters, we did a lot of that. And it just taught me so much about, perseverance in itself.
Yeah. Wow. You learned a ton at a young age. We're not all so lucky, but I'm impressed that you learned all that at a young age. And I love your metaphors and analogies. Well, let's talk about that. So is there a moment, that maybe in combat, that you can talk about that taught you something about, lasting of, courage and teamwork or anything that you can take away from that?
Oh yeah, I would say definitely my first shoot in Afghanistan. We'd been there. I'd been there like a few months at that point, and then pretty much done like a lot of just flying overhead operations, ISR type stuff. And these are all jobs really you don't want to have to do, but if somebody's number is called and their back's against the wall, you want to be the guy to go. And we had landed from one operation. We had just shot our what we call our tweak round. So if you imagine like just like any weapon, you have to spend a few rounds to line in your sights. And so we'd shot 7, 8, 105 millimeters at that point. So I was reloading what we had shot from that operation of doing nothing essentially. And the pilot comes back to the gun deck and he's like, "Hey guys, there's a Green Beret team that's pinned down." And he's like they're taking RPG and disco fire and stuff like that. He's like, "Who's with me?" And the verse, Isaiah 6:8's always been important to me, and the send me verse. And in our own way, the whole crew, we all said send me, together. And then we flew up to eastern Afghanistan. An hour and a half later, I look over, man, I see a couple RPG flashes, and I get back on the 40 mil. And my lead gun looks at me, and he sort of recognizes that this is it, like this is the moment that my life's going to change forever. And I realized in that moment, after we took out the threat, that I got to do more for my country in an hour and a half, 2 hour flight, and I'd done my whole life. And what's cool about the gunship is you have this 13-man crew back then, this organized chaos fashion of all working together to get rounds out to save your brothers and sisters on the ground. That was a sense of belonging had never been more important to me, and didn't understand what that meant really to that point.
Yeah. Well, first off, as a civilian, I don't think you guys get enough praise, but thank you so much for like just enduring all that to secure our freedom. Because thank goodness there are people like you that can do that. So thank you.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Uh, so let's talk about civilian life. So obviously you're in this intense, adrenaline-filled world. When all that stops, like how do you, how do you handle that transition back to civilian life? For after just going through all of that.
I really struggled, to be honest with you. That was the hardest part, was leaving. I'm at a point there where I'm out processing. The writing's on the wall. The end is near, right, to my Air Force career, and the whole sense of identity, losing that's a real thing that I think many veterans honestly struggle with. And I'm walking out this door to this like admin office, and I realize there's not even a door handle on the other end of that door, and sort of like the opposite of Hotel California. You can leave, but you can never really get back in, right? And but I had to recognize that moment that like, hey, like I had to get over myself a little bit, right? And like saying this machine goes on, it keeps going, and really what changed to what writing did for me is, it changed what I thought my legacy is, right? And right now it's about the mission as being the best dad I could be, the best, husband I could be, and best friend and wingman I could be to those that, share a similar struggle.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, your book Moonchild, I know it's really a personal, frankly, a deeply personal book. What does the title represent to you now?
Yes. So Moonchild, there's a quote by Rita Clint that says, "Stay wild, Moonchild." And for the moon flying, it made it really, especially on the gunship, we always mostly flew at night. It was like a lighthouse to me. It was like a get well point, and it made flying almost effortless. And then also there's a really a perseverance meaning with the moon, like on those darkest days, darkest nights. That's when that moon burns the brightest. And that's you don't get to fall, you get to rise, and it basically the moon represents getting back up.
Hmm. I like that. Uh, Projecting Grandeur, which I'm often asked about just the title of the show in general, but the concept about projecting grandeur is about living from authenticity, rather than image. It's about, all of the things that you want the world to see you as. How did you reconnect with who you truly are after military life?
Yeah, so what had happened, I developed a really bad, drinking problem with all this stuff my last year in. And what started out as a weekend drinking habit, turned into every day, every night, at least a pint of liquor a night just to go to sleep. And I went through this exposure treatment called prolonged exposure with a psychiatrist, and she was with USOCOM there. And the first time I told her the story, she even cried, and I talk about that a little bit. And she was like, "You should tell your story, over and over." And part of that process is you're writing this out on paper to where like you can get basically comfortable being uncomfortable, right? Getting those words out, and sort of like we're doing now, talking about the situation there. And when I got out and the dust settled, I was like, man, like this, I recognize that someone could get help from this. Like, if one person reads this story and gets help, that's a victory, that's a win. And it is a common struggle, like I was getting at earlier, between veterans, and today being Veterans Day, that that you realize that your service mattered. And but what's important now is how you move on, and how you exit, and you still leave an imprint on people.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up too, because I was going to bring that up at the end of the show, but I think it's really fitting that you and I are talking on Veterans Day. And again, thank you for everything. And I can only imagine the struggles making that transition. So thank you for sharing as well.
Thank you. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, I believe there's no. I don't really believe in coincidence. I believe God, or whatever you believe in. There's always a reason for everything, right? And maybe the stars align for this day for this to happen. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but maybe if you could just, expound upon it a little bit more. I'm curious about the role, that writing would play in your healing and rediscovery. And you mentioned kind of getting it out, but like, can you elaborate on that a little bit more just for our audience so they understand the importance of like just putting things down on paper?
Yeah. So what would happen when every time I had that urge to drink at that point, and my wife had given me the ultimatum of like, it's either me and the family or the bottle, and what happened was every time I had that urge and that that crave to drink, if you've ever struggled with alcoholism, or anybody that has, I know that I feel for you. It's a beast, and I would pick up a pen instead of a bottle, and and then usually even like a scratch paper or something like that, and then wake up in the morning and try to make sense of all this. And what would happen, I would have these, Charlotte's Web of emotional words, throw them on paper, and then try to make them a roadmap, when I woke up in the morning. And it really does help, with trauma and, living these experiences again and sort of putting them out in a symbolic way on paper. It's a beautiful thing to paint a picture on paper with words.
Yeah, it really is. And I think you, as the unintended author, maybe even in the beginning, I don't think you have full appreciation on what those words mean for other people as they read them. So I think it's really powerful.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so kind of looking back, let's go back to your time in the cockpit, and if you can extrapolate one lesson that today still guides you, what would that be?
I would say I would go back to my first flight there on the gunship. Let me paint a picture. It went so horrible that my instructor said something effective. I was reason they had to brief, seatbelts on airliners, and he saw me sort of licking my wounds, feeling sorry for myself. And he's like, what's the most important word in the dictionary? And I was like, man, I don't know. My head's spinning, right? And he's like, perseverance. And he's like, I want you to think about what that word means to you and come back ready, next flight, ready to fight and do good. And I did that. And once that happened, I got back up. I never looked back. I was like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And the point is, on those missions, those even days for normal life, right? When everything's against you, whether it's the weather, the emergency procedures, the systems, whatever the case may be, that you're not out of the fight on that darkest day. That's when you need to be the best aviator you could be. Basically, being the best on the worst day of your life. It's taught me that.
I had a show. It was probably about 2 months ago where I was interviewing somebody, and they talked about a similar concept about you're only as good as your worst day, which is kind
Yeah.
of that same concept. And I really like that because everybody talks about how great they were on their best day, but that's the easy time.
Oh, yeah.
It's when things are bad and your darkest moments, that's when it becomes hard.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good illustration too. And another sort of metaphor I use it in the book there was, if you're going through a terrible time, just, remember, like Henry Ford said, an aircraft, takes off against the wind, not with it. And how that sort of works is, the wind flows over the wing and it creates that pressure, which in turn provides lift. So it's sort of ironic, all that sort of ties together. But yeah, I've always looked at as flying as a way to, basically keep going and you're not out of the fight.
Yeah, I like that. Well, we have a lot of listeners that might be making a transition in their own lives, whether it be stepping out of a safety net of a job and going into starting their own business, or whether it's selling a business and stepping into a new chapter. But, for anybody out there that's kind of facing their own life shifts, how can they ground themselves while stepping into something new? Like, how can you give them, from your experience of doing that?
I would say embrace it. And, I felt a lot better once I got out of my comfort zone of what I thought normal was. And change is often good, and also it's realizing the fact it's having the faith and just the fallback of like, I know that everything at the end of the day with this, with this decision is going to be okay. One of my favorite quotes, and not to get too spiritual on you, but the other day, and it was like, basically like, God will put you back together in front of those that broke you. And I like to say, God will put you back together in front of those things that broke you, whether it's trauma, alcohol, just bad luck, whatever the case may be. He's got it.
Hmm. Anthony, I got to say, I love, a lot of people are afraid to admit things that are bad in their life, and they hide behind them and try to fix everything in the privacy of their own home. And sometimes just being comfortable talking about things, because we're all human, right? We all have demons that we have faced in our lives in different forms, and being able to be comfortable and talking about it is just so healthy.
Oh
And
yeah.
I just applaud you because it's really fun just listening to you and how comfortable you are talking about this past of yours.
Thank you, Ryan. Like I said, it's a pleasure to be here. And, the way I realize writing is it's not just about me. And it's, if so many people are going to see your words and your emotions, and you're right, you have to let your guard down a lot. And that is uncomfortable at first, right? And, it's even my first podcast, I was just, terrified. My biggest fear is actually, ironically, talking in front of people. And here I am with Ron on this podcast, talking to, thousands probably. But yeah, it's an honor at the end of the day, man. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I just have one last question for you that I'm just curious about. So, uh, first off, what's next for you? And second, like, how do you continue projecting your own version of grandeur? Like, what's your plan? What are you gonna do?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm in the middle of writing a new book, trying to get that finished up by the end of the holidays. And also, what I'm doing is I actually put in for a nonprofit with the state of New Mexico. Actually, yesterday they approved the title of it. But basically, what it is, I'm developing an app where jobs like first responders, these very uncommon jobs, or anybody really, and especially veterans. Every story matters to me, and basically what it would be is you would speak into this app, and you tell the story, and it soft edits it for you. Then, and through the nonprofit and donations, if that person wanted to get their book, published or edited for either free or really, really cheap charge, it would be possible. So that's I'm really excited about that, and I can't wait for that to actually get off the ground.
That's really cool.
Like,
I look forward to hearing about the second book too. I might have to have you back on to talk about that. Uh, Well, Anthony,
I'd love
listen, I just
to.
want to say thanks. Yeah, thanks again for being part of the show. Thanks for your service as well. And today being Veterans Day, I know many of our audience will not view this on Veterans Day, but it's a special day. And make sure to thank some of the servicemen and women in your neighborhood, because without them, we can't be here doing what we're doing, projecting our grandeur. So thanks for being part of the show. Thanks for all you've done, and just thank you again for your service.
Thank you, Ron. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Have a great day, Anthony, and look forward to talking to you on the second book.
You as well, brother. Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone. Keep projecting that grandeur. And until next time, see ya.